The paper slipped from my trembling fingers and scattered across the kitchen floor like broken promises. David's signature glared up at me from the deed transfer, dated 3 days ago. 3 days. While I'd been planning our anniversary dinner, my husband had been selling our home to his mistress. The silence in our kitchen felt suffocating. 23 years of marriage reduced to forged documents and lies. I knelt among the scattered pages, each one a dagger to my chest. Sale price, $450,000.
Buyer, Elena Vasquez.
The woman whose perfume I'd been smelling on David's shirts for months. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. David's name flashed on the screen. Sarah, we need to talk. His voice carried that careful, practiced tone he used with difficult clients. I was now just another problem to be managed, another contract to dissolve. About what, David? I think you know. The line went quiet except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. 23 years, and this was how it ended. With legal documents scattered on the floor and my husband speaking to me like a stranger. You sold our house. Sarah, listen.
To her.
To your mistress. He didn't deny it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been growing for months, maybe years. I thought about all the late nights he'd claimed were work emergencies, all the business trips that seemed to multiply, all the times he'd looked through me like I was invisible. I'll be by tomorrow to get my things. Elena will be moving in next week. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. Not only was he leaving me, but he was installing his replacement in our bedroom, our kitchen, our life. The house where we'd brought our daughter home from the hospital. The house where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and all the small moments that make a marriage. This is my home too, David. Was your home? Check the deed. It's been transferred. The line went dead. I stared at the papers scattered around me, my vision blurring with tears and rage. The deed looked official, legitimate. David's signature was perfect. Mine was forged but skillfully done. For a moment, panic seized my chest. Had I actually lost everything? Then I remembered the manila envelope hidden in my jewelry box upstairs. 2 years ago, when David's behavior first started changing, when the late nights began and the distance grew, I'd consulted a lawyer. Not for divorce, not then. Just for protection. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something had whispered to me that storm clouds were gathering. The real deed was upstairs, filed and notarized, transferring the house into my sole ownership. The one David had signed and sold was worthless paper. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs shaking. In our bedroom, I opened the jewelry box and pulled out the envelope. My fingers traced the lawyer's seal, the notary stamp, the date from 2 years ago. While David had been planning his betrayal, I'd been preparing for it. The house was mine. Legally, completely, indisputably mine. I called my lawyer first. Margaret, it's Sarah Chun. I need you to file an eviction notice. 2 names, David Chun and Elena Vasquez. Sarah, slow down. What's happening? I explained about the forged deed, the fake sale, the mistress moving into my home. Margaret listened without interruption, her breathing growing sharper with each detail. They can't do this, Sarah. That deed transfer is illegal. Fraud, actually. I know. How long for the eviction? 48 hours if we file it as emergency fraud. I'll have the papers ready by morning. Do it. The next morning, I watched from my car as David loaded boxes into his BMW. He moved with the careful efficiency of a man protecting his guilty conscience, glancing repeatedly at the windows as if expecting me to appear with tears and pleading. Instead, I sat silent in my Honda, documenting everything with my phone's camera. Elena arrived at noon in a silver Lexus that probably cost more than I made in a year. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 35 to my 51, with a kind of polished perfection that screamed expensive maintenance. Her laugh carried across the driveway as David helped her with her luggage, the same laugh I'd heard in the background during his suspicious phone calls. They looked happy, giddy even, like teenagers playing house while the adults were away. I waited until evening to knock on my own front door. Elena answered, her face falling when she recognized me. Behind her, David appeared, his jaw tightening into that familiar, aggressive line. Sarah, what are you doing here? I live here. No, you don't. We discussed this yesterday. The house has been sold. I held up the eviction notice, watching the color drain from both their faces as they read. This house belongs to me. It has belonged to me for 2 years. The deed you sold Elena is fraudulent. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, or the sheriff will remove you forcibly. David's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something that looked almost like respect before settling on fury. You can't do this. I'm half owner of this property. Actually, you're not. I transferred the house into my sole ownership 2 years ago. You signed the papers, David. Notarized and filed. Check with the county recorder if you don't believe me. Elena's voice cracked as she spoke. But David said,
David Lied.
To you, to me, apparently to everyone. I turned to leave, then stopped. The words came from somewhere deep and bitter. Oh, and Elena? You might want to ask David about the other 2 women before you get too comfortable. The door slammed behind me, but not before I heard Elena's voice rising in accusation and David's fumbling denials. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. The house felt like it was breathing again, like the toxic presence poisoning its walls had finally been acknowledged and named. The sheriff arrived at 10 o'clock the next morning. I watched from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen window across the street as David and Elena loaded their belongings into a moving truck. David's movements were sharp and angry, his phone pressed constantly to his ear. Probably calling lawyers, trying to find some legal loophole, some way to undo what he'd set in motion. Elena looked shell-shocked, her perfect composure cracked and bleeding. She kept staring at the house like she couldn't quite believe it was being taken away. The fairy tale was over before it had properly begun. Mrs. Patterson handed me a cup of coffee and settled beside me at her kitchen table. 23 years I've been watching you two. Never thought it would end like this. Neither did I. You doing okay, sweetheart? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My marriage was over. My husband had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. My life, as I'd known it, was shattered. But watching David and Elena loading their possessions onto a truck that would take them away from my home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. I think I might be. The moving truck pulled away at 2 in the afternoon. David didn't look back, but Elena did. Her face was pale and drawn, her earlier confidence replaced by the hollow look of someone who discovered that stolen happiness comes with a price. I waited until evening before I went home. My key turned smoothly in the lock, and I stepped into silence that felt different now. Not the oppressive quiet of secrets and lies, but the clean emptiness of possibility. The house still smelled like Elena's perfume in places, expensive floral scent that seemed to cling to the upholstery and curtains. I opened every window, letting the spring air sweep through rooms that had been suffocating under the weight of betrayal. In the master bedroom, I found Elena's earrings on the nightstand. Diamond studs, probably worth more than my car payment. I dropped them in a jewelry box and made a mental note to have them returned. I wasn't vindictive by nature, just thorough. My phone rang as I was stripping the bed. David's name on the screen. Sarah, we need to discuss terms. No, we don't. This isn't over. I'll fight this in court. That house is half mine regardless of what papers you think you have. The papers I have are legal and binding, David. Filed with the county 2 years ago. Your signature is on them. Witnessed and notarized. You tricked me. The accusation hung in the air between us. I thought about pointing out the irony, about reminding him who had actually been doing the tricking. Instead, I kept my voice level and calm. I protected myself. There's a difference. I'll sue you for everything. With what money? I checked our accounts this morning. You cleaned them out yesterday, didn't you? Every penny from our savings, our retirement funds. Did you tell Elena about that part of your escape plan? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. David. How did you know? I know you. I've known you for 23 years. You never do anything halfway, never leave loose ends. Of course you'd take the money. Sarah, listen.
No.
I'm done listening. You made your choices, and now you get to live with them. Just like I have to live with mine. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended calm. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, watched television shows that David had always criticized. The absence of his presence was like removing a stone from my shoe. I didn't realize how much it had been hurting until it was gone. My daughter called on Thursday. Mom, Dad told me what happened. Are you okay? Jessica's voice carried the careful concern of someone navigating between warring parents. 24 years old and already wise enough to know that divorce turns children into diplomats, regardless of their age. I'm fine, sweetheart. He said you stole the house from him. I protected what was mine. There's a difference. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mom, he's been cheating for a long time, hasn't he? The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because it meant Jessica had been carrying this knowledge, this hurt, alone. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't know how, and I kept hoping. Oh, honey, no. This wasn't your burden to carry. I saw him with someone at a restaurant last year. Not Elena, someone else. A redhead. They were. Jessica, stop. It doesn't matter now. But it did matter. Each revelation was another wound, another betrayal to process and catalog and somehow find a way to survive. How many women had there been? How many lies had I swallowed without question? Are you going to be okay, Mom? Financially, I mean. I thought about David's cleaned-out bank accounts, about the house that was now solely mine, about the savings I'd hidden away over the years in accounts he'd never known about. I'd learned to be careful with money the same way I'd learned to be careful with trust. I'll be fine. Better than fine, actually. Good. Because Dad and Elena are staying in a hotel, and from what I heard, it's not going well. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Stolen love built on lies rarely survives contact with reality. The divorce papers arrived the following Monday, hand-delivered by a process server who apologized for the intrusion. David was asking for half of everything: the house, the remaining savings, my retirement fund. He was also asking for alimony. I called Margaret. He wants what now? Alimony. Spousal support. He claims he's sacrificed his earning potential to support my career. Margaret's laugh was sharp and humorless. The man who committed fraud and adultery wants you to pay him alimony. How's his relationship with reality these days? Complicated, apparently. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you know about the affair when you transferred the house into your name? I considered lying, considered protecting myself from the possible legal complications. But Margaret was my lawyer, and she needed the truth to defend me properly. I suspected. I didn't have proof, but something felt wrong. The late nights, the distance, the way he looked at me like I was furniture he was tired of. Call it intuition. That's not the same as knowledge. Intuition isn't evidence of adultery, and protecting yourself based on suspicions isn't fraud. We're good. What about his alimony request? Let him try. The man committed fraud, cleaned out your joint accounts, and abandoned the marriage for another woman. I'd love to see him explain to a judge why you should pay him support. 2 weeks later, I got my answer about David's financial situation. Jessica called with an update that made me feel simultaneously vindicated and sorry for him. Mom, Dad's broke. What do you mean? Elena left him. Apparently, when she found out about the other women and the fact that he's basically penniless now, she decided the fairy tale was over. He's living in a studio apartment in Riverside, working for some small firm that pays about a third of what he was making before. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. 23 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. With him alone in a studio apartment, having lost his wife, his mistress, his home, and his financial security. How do you feel about all this, Jess? Honestly, relieved. The last few years, watching you two pretend everything was fine when it obviously wasn't, it was exhausting. At least now, everyone can stop pretending. That evening, I walked through my house slowly, taking inventory. In the living room, I'd removed the photos of David and me, replacing them with pictures of Jessica, of my sister's family, of friends and moments that belonged entirely to me. The walls looked fuller somehow, more alive. In the kitchen, I'd rearranged everything. The coffee maker moved to where I could reach it easily instead of where David preferred it. The spice rack organized by my logic instead of his. Small changes that announced to the space that it was mine now, shaped by my needs and preferences. The master bedroom had been completely transformed. New bedding in colors David had always criticized as too bright. A reading chair by the window where I could drink my morning coffee and watch the sunrise. My books on both nightstands instead of just mine on the left side. I was redecorating my life, room by room, choice by choice. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue suit that projected competence and respectability. Margaret met me in the courthouse lobby, her briefcase thick with documentation. Remember, let me do the talking. If the judge asks you a direct question, answer simply and honestly. Don't volunteer information. David arrived 15 minutes late with a lawyer who looked like he'd been found through a late-night television commercial. Elena wasn't with him. I noticed he'd lost weight, and his suit looked expensive but slightly too big, as if it had been bought in better times. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Margaret presented the evidence of David's fraud in selling a house he didn't own, his adultery, his theft of joint marital funds. David's lawyer tried to argue that the house transfer had been done under false pretenses, but the timeline didn't support his case. The transfer had occurred 2 years ago, long before any concrete evidence of adultery. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened with the patience of someone who'd seen every variation of marital dishonesty. Mr. Chun, you're asking for alimony from a wife you defrauded and abandoned. You're asking for half the value of a house you tried to sell without legal ownership. You're asking for half of retirement funds that you already emptied without permission. David's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised her hand. I'm not finished. Mrs. Chun, the house is yours. The remaining assets will be split equitably, minus the amount Mr. Chun removed from joint accounts, which will be credited entirely to you. Mr. Chun, your request for alimony is denied. Your request for half the house value is denied. Your request for half the remaining assets is denied. The gavel came down with a sound like finality itself. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. Margaret squeezed my arm. That went better than I expected. What happens now? Now you get on with your life. The divorce will be final in 6 months. David will probably appeal, but he doesn't have grounds and he definitely doesn't have money for an extended legal battle. I drove home through streets that looked different somehow, brighter and more welcoming. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and was surprised by what I saw. The woman looking back at me had clear eyes and straight shoulders. She looked like someone who could handle whatever came next. That evening, I called my sister in Phoenix. Claire, it's over. The hearing, the divorce, all of it. How do you feel? It was the same question Mrs. Patterson had asked months ago, but the answer was different now.
Free.
Scared, but free. Good. You want to come visit for a while? Get out of that house. Clear your head. I looked around my living room, at the photos on the walls and the books on the coffee table and the Afghan my grandmother had made draped over the chair I'd bought just because I loved the color. Thanks, but no. This is my home. I'm not running from it anymore. After we hung up, I made myself dinner and ate it at the dining room table instead of in front of the television. I used the good china, the wedding set that David had always claimed was too fancy for everyday use. The plate felt substantial in my hands, the weight of quality and permanence. As I cleaned up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Elena. I wanted to apologize for everything that happened. I didn't know about the house situation. I hope you can forgive me someday. I stared at the message for a long time, considering my response. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Elena carry the weight of her guilt without my absolution. Part of me wanted to unleash 2 years of accumulated rage and hurt. Instead, I wrote back, "We all make choices. We all live with consequences. I wish you well." I deleted her number immediately afterward. Some doors needed to stay closed. Winter came early that year, and I found myself enjoying the solitude in ways that surprised me. I took up cooking again, trying recipes that David had always dismissed as too exotic or time-consuming. I rearranged the furniture to catch the afternoon light better. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a gray tabby named Winston who seemed to understand that this was a house in transition. The holidays were difficult. 23 years of Christmas traditions had to be reimagined or abandoned. But Jessica came home for a week, and we created new traditions. We went to midnight mass together for the first time since she was a child. We made cookies using my grandmother's recipe instead of the store-bought ones David had preferred. We watched romantic comedies and cried at the happy endings without anyone rolling their eyes or checking their phone. "You seem different, Mom." "Happier." "I feel different. Like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale." "Do you miss him?" The question caught me off guard. Did I miss David? I missed the idea of him, the version of our marriage that had existed in my imagination but not in reality. I missed the security of couplehood, the assumption that there would always be someone to share the small moments with. But David himself, the man who had lied and cheated and tried to steal my home? The man who had looked at me like an obstacle to his happiness.
No.
I miss who I thought he was. But I don't miss who he actually turned out to be. Spring brought renewal in ways both literal and metaphorical. I planted a garden in the backyard, choosing flowers and vegetables based entirely on my own preferences. I painted the guest bedroom a warm yellow that David would have hated. I joined a book club at the local library and made friends with women who had never known me as half of a couple. The divorce became final on a Tuesday in April. Margaret called with the news just as I was getting home from work.
"It's done, Sarah.
You're officially free." "Thank you for everything. Thank you for letting me be part of your victory." That evening, I sat in my garden with Winston purring on my lap and a glass of wine in my hand. The house behind me glowed with warm light from every window, no longer the site of secrets and lies, but simply home. My home. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, finding those forged papers scattered on the kitchen floor, my world crumbling around me. That woman had been so afraid, so broken by betrayal that she'd almost been paralyzed by loss. But she'd also been smart enough to protect herself 2 years earlier when intuition whispered that trouble was coming. She'd been strong enough to fight for what was hers. She'd been brave enough to start over at 51, to rebuild a life that was entirely her own construction. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Happy Divorce Day, Mom. I'm proud of you." I laughed out loud, startling Winston from his nap. Happy Divorce Day. It sounded like a celebration, and maybe it was. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own future stretching ahead of me like an unmapped country. There would be challenges ahead, loneliness to navigate, fears to overcome. But there would also be choices to make based entirely on my own desires, dreams to pursue without asking permission, a life to build that belonged only to me. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way I liked it, strong and black, and drank it from the mug Jessica had given me for Mother's Day. "World's Strongest Mom," it read, and for the first time in months, I believed it might be true. The papers that had once scattered across this floor like broken promises were gone now, replaced by new documents. The deed to my house, stamped and filed. The divorce decree, signed and sealed. The bank statements showing accounts that were mine alone. I'd learned that betrayal could be survived, that lies could be overcome, that even the most devastating losses could become the foundation for something stronger. The woman who'd knelt among those scattered papers was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and had the legal documents to prove it. Outside, The morning sun painted my garden in shades of gold and green, illuminating a space that belonged entirely to me. I'd planted it, I'd tend it, and I'd harvest whatever it chose to grow. Just like the rest of my life.